Oh, hello my friends, hope you are well. These little Thanos looking orcs you see before you are the result of an existential realization I had recently. I was thinking about the orc I'd painted a while ago using a toothpick, about how it looked pretty awful.
Look how they massacred my boy.
And how it was the only 40k orc I've ever painted. I thought to myself, if I leave my house tomorrow and a giant eagle swoops me up and carries me off to its nest to feed its children, I will die having my only ever painted orc be in a complete scruffy mess. Can I go to my grave with such knowledge in mind? No, I cannot. I must paint more orcs. I must redeem myself. Now, I didn't have a particular colour scheme in mind for these guys, but I did want to have a fun time painting them, so I'm going to stray away from the typical green orc colours and play around with some purple skin tones. My first paint uses Xerius Purple to get a nice robust base coat for their flesh, and once that's had a couple of coats, I mix in a little bit of Genestealer Purple and start building up an initial highlight. Usually I paint the skin on minis last, but that often means it doesn't get the attention it deserves. It doesn't look great in the end. So instead, this time I'm starting with the skin, and I'm going to take my time here to see what I can get done. I'm mixing a little bit of Cadian flesh tone to our highlight mixture and start applying this with more of a stippling technique than my last coat. I'm stippling here because I want the skin to have a bit of a textured look to it. Orcs are pretty rough and ready, so we don't want them to have that Nivea extra smooth, extra soft skin. We want them looking a bit gnarly. And the highlights are looking alright now, but it's gone on quite heavily in some areas where I've got too pumped up in my orc-like painting fury. So to fix that, thin down your base coat to a thin glazed consistency and lovingly caress that onto the areas in question. This allows you to smooth out those transitions without having to cover them up completely. I mix in a bit of Genestealer Purple and Cadian flesh tone together to embolden those highlights a bit more, and then finally add a bit more of that flesh tone to the mixture to add one last predominantly peach coloured highlight. Lovely. So I'm pretty pleased with that overall. It's nice and purple, it's got a bit of texture from the stippling, it's reminiscent of Thanos' nutsack, and it wasn't that painful to do, making it win, 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 which is 4 wins. Amazing. Now, let's turn our attention to the rest of the models. First up, a quick bit of Rakkar flesh goes onto the teeth, and I can't tell you how satisfying this part was. I don't know why, but every little tooth I painted unlocked some hidden pleasure response in my brain. My synapses were firing on all cylinders, boom, 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 dopamine everywhere, and then I ran out of teeth to paint. Oh. Next, I take care of the metallics, and since I've primed the orcs in black, I don't need to faff around with dark undercoats. Instead, I just start slamming down lead belcher for the axes, gun barrels, helmets and shoulder pads and whatever else needs it, and then I use some greedy gold for the shell casings, tips of the guns, their absolute steez earrings and various other little buckles and bits. I wash all of these parts in Strong Tone by Army Painter, and Army Painter gets a bit of a bad rap because 70% of their paints have about as good coverage as a sock on a picnic table. But I have to admit, their washes are actually really good, and Strong Tone has become my go-to now, even over Agrak Surfshade. Blasphemy! After the wash is dried, I touch up the metallics again using their base coats, and then add some quick highlights using some Stormhost Silver for the silvery parts, and Auric Armor Gold for the, gold parts. You got it. For the bodies of the weapons, I could lie and say I put a lot of thought into my colour choice. But really I just looked into my drawer of paints and like an angry bull, I saw red and went for it. So Mephiston Red goes on as the base coat, and then I slosh on a wash of Caribou Crimson to add a bit of shadow and definition. To edge highlight, I use some Wild Rider Red, and maybe there's a joke in there somewhere about Wild Riders and whatever I just said about angry bulls and the colour red, I don't know. So as your homework, I'd like you to fill in this section of voiceover for me with a relevant joke, so I don't have to. Thank you very much. Now those guns are looking pretty good actually. Cash money baby, money in the bank. Does the red clash with the purple skin? Yeah, maybe. Will I change it? Will I Up next, I'm going to go for the brown sections, so I whip out the Rhinox hide and start applying it to the trousers and any backpacks or various other little strappy bits. Often I'll use a bunch of different brown paints to mix up the different leathers and fabric pieces, but today I'm just feeling like Rhinoxide is doing everything I need it to, so I'm not going to make extra work for myself here. I decided to go for a bit of a leathery effect on the straps and bags, so I first go around with a small brush painting on a battered and distressed texture with some Scrag Brown. I then do the same with some Cadian Flesh Tone, applying it more sparingly than my last coat. And once that's dried, I glaze on a couple of very thin layers of Rhinox hide and matte black paint here and there over the textured parts to give it a leathery look. I learned this technique from Maverick Paints, and although he does it way better than I can, it still looks as leathery as one of those old British people who go retire in Spain for a surprisingly small time investment and way less medical complications. To finish off our browns, I mix some Mournfang Brown into the Rhinox hide to give the trousers a rough and ready highlight, and then touch up any little wrist wraps with some Gore Brown. Now, we're fast approaching the end of our painting process for these minis, so I go around and add a quick highlight to all the black areas by first using some Skaven Blight Dinge as an initial more sketchy highlight, and then some Rust Grey as more of a finer edge highlight. I don't prime minis in black all that often, but I think after today I'm a changed man. It saved me so much time that would otherwise have to be spent poking my brush into weird little spots to cover up the bright grey, which should be shadowed, and painting boots and other little bits like that black. I've just been able to skip that step this time and go straight into highlighting the black sections instead, which is groundbreaking stuff as far as I'm concerned. I know most people know that already, but for all the people who are as dumb as I am, prime your minis black. It's just like the ancient saying goes, once you go black, you never go back. I'm pretty sure that saying's about painting minis, I think, isn't it? Anyway, fear not mortals, for once I have not forgotten to paint the eyes in. So I first used some Carabao Crimson again as a bit of a glaze in the eye sockets just to darken them down a bit. And then I just tickle their balls, their eyeballs of course, with a mixture of Moot Green and Flash Gits Yellow. I played around off camera trying out pupils on these eyes, but honestly it looked pretty awful. So I've just left them with these little mini limes instead. And these two weren't allowed eyes because their helmets obscured them just enough for me to not want to bother. And finally, the last bits I'll be painting on these minis, whatever you call this thing, this little feather duster on top, and this wrist wrap. I do the same as I did for the guns, applying a base coat of Mephiston Red, followed by a wash of Carabao Crimson, and then a final little highlight of Wild Rider Red. I paint the little head wrap tube head sock thing here with some more Rakkar Flesh, and then give it a wash with some Agrak Surfshade, and they are finito. I'll add a quick bit of my homemade mud mixture and maybe some tufts of grass for the bases. Nothing special for these guys as I don't really have big plans for them, but I think that will do it. Fly like a hawk, purple like an orc. Let's see how they came out. So, yes, looking pretty good. I'm going to say what I always say and say that they're not perfect. There's a lot of room for improvement here, but they look a lot better than the one I painted with a toothpick. Meaning I can now go to my grave without the fear of it being tarnished with disrespectful graffiti about how I only ever painted one little orc. And what's funny is, when I finished these, or I should say when I thought I finished them, I ended up going around and doing a bunch more painting to get the things I missed, like highlighting the teeth, painting the horns, painting the axe handles, painting these little shawl things here on the front, which I somehow missed completely, and doing a bunch of little touch-ups too. It's funny because I was really proud of myself for actually remembering to paint the eyes, and I still had missed about 50% of the minis. But it's fine. From my extensive 1-week experience in the building trade, I would know these little odds and ends to be called the snaggins. You know, the main bulk of the work is done, but there's a bunch of small little details that can improve the cohesion of everything. So you gotta put your hard hats on and get your snaggings done, people. Anyway, yeah, I feel pretty good about these orcs, to be honest. I've gone for a pretty atypical colour scheme for them, and of course they're a bit rough here and there, but I had a really fun time painting them overall. So time and money well spent. And before I scurry off to my little swamp hole, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who's been supporting the channel recently. I hit 1,000 subscribers on my last video and we're actually on our way to 2,000 now, which honestly seems so crazy to me. So a big thank you to everyone who's been watching, and if you enjoyed this then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment, as I love to hear what you guys have to say, which is usually about how much I stink. And it was a bit of a quicker video today, just kind of messing about, having fun, but I've got tons of videos planned for the future. My only constraint is finding the time to do them all. I have been your boy, Swamp Ratio, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. See ya!